Alright, so we've talked about Walt's kills and his intelligence and what people hated about him, but we haven't really broken down how Walt actually manipulates people. Like, what are the specific techniques he uses to get inside people's heads and bend them to his will? Because Walt doesn't just stumble into controlling everyone around him, he's got a whole toolkit of manipulation tactics that he uses consistently throughout the show. And the scary thing is, most of these techniques work because they're subtle. People don't realize they're being manipulated until it's way too late. We're gonna walk through Walt's progression as a manipulator, from his early clumsy attempts to when he becomes genuinely masterful at it. This isn't just a list, this is understanding how Walt evolves into this psychological puppet master. The foundation, playing victim. Walt's very first manipulation technique, the one he uses from day one, is positioning himself as the victim who deserves sympathy. And this makes sense because at the beginning, Walt genuinely is in a terrible situation. He's got cancer, he's broke, he's scared. That's real. But Walt quickly figures out that his victimhood is a tool he can use. I'm just a sick man trying to provide for my family before I die. That's Walt's opening move in almost every difficult conversation. And it works because who wants to be the person attacking a dying man? Watch how Walt uses his cancer diagnosis. Anytime someone questions his decisions or his behavior, Walt can pull out the cancer card. I'm dying, can't you give me a break? Can't you let me do this one thing? Skyler tries to confront him about lying. Walt coughs and looks weak, and suddenly Skyler feels guilty for being harsh with a sick man. Hank asks too many questions. Walt plays up the illness angle and Hank backs off because he doesn't want to stress his dying brother-in-law. The genius of this technique is it makes people feel bad for even questioning Walt. You're not just disagreeing with his decisions, you're being cruel to a cancer patient. That emotional weight shuts down a lot of criticism before it can even start. And Walt extends this beyond the cancer. Everything is always someone else's fault, some external circumstance that forced his hand. I had no choice. That phrase comes up constantly. Walt didn't choose to cook meth, he was forced into it by circumstances. He didn't choose to kill that person, they made him do it. This victimhood narrative is the foundation everything else builds on, because if Walt's the victim, then he can't be the villain. And that makes all his other manipulation tactics work better because people's guard is down around victims, appearing weak until it's time to strike. Early on, Walt figures out that being underestimated is actually an advantage. Walt looks like a mild-mannered high school teacher. He's skinny, he wears khakis, he's got this wimpy voice. People look at him and see someone harmless and kind of pathetic, and Walt learns to lean into that. With Tuco in that first meeting, Walt acts nervous and scared. Tuco thinks Walt's just another weak civilian he can push around. Then Walt blows up his office with fulminated mercury and suddenly the power dynamic shifts. That's Walt's pattern. Act weak and confused and helpless, let the other person think they're in control, then hit them when they're not expecting it. With Skyler early on, Walt plays the confused husband who doesn't understand why she's upset. He acts like he's just trying his best and doesn't know what he's doing wrong. This makes Skyler feel like maybe she's overreacting, maybe she's being too hard on poor confused Walt, but underneath, Walt knows exactly what he's doing. The weakness is performance. He's gathering information, figuring out the other person's buttons, waiting for the right moment to assert control. This technique works because people naturally let their guard down around people they perceive as weak. If you seem helpless, people don't see you as a threat. They might even feel protective of you, and that's when Walt strikes. By the time people realize Walt's not actually weak or confused, he's already maneuvered them into a position where they can't easily escape. Rewriting reality, the gaslighting escalation. As Walt gets more experience with manipulation, he starts to get really good at gaslighting, making people question their own perception of reality. Gaslighting is when you make someone doubt their own memory, their own judgment, their own sanity. And Walt does this constantly, especially to Skyler and Jesse. With Skyler, Walt rewrites history all the time. Skyler will confront him about something specific, a lie she caught him in, a behavior she noticed, and Walt will either deny it happened or reframe it completely or act like Skyler's remembering it wrong. That's not what happened. You're overreacting. You're twisting my words. I explained this to you already, don't you remember? After a while, Skyler starts to doubt herself. Did she remember that conversation correctly? Is she being unreasonable? Is she the problem? That's gaslighting working. You make the other person question their own judgment so they become dependent on your version of reality. With Jesse, Walt does this in more subtle ways. When Jane dies, Walt positions himself as the person helping Jesse through his grief. Jesse doesn't know that Walt watched Jane die and could have saved her. So when Jesse's devastated, Walt's there being supportive, and Jesse thinks Walt's this good guy helping him. That's a massive reality distortion. Jesse's actual reality is that Walt killed Jane, but Jesse's perceived reality is that Walt's his only friend who understands his pain. Walt has completely rewritten what happened. Later, when Jesse starts to suspect things, Walt gaslights him about the rice and cigarette. Walt took it to poison Brock and frame Gus, but when Jesse accuses Walt, Walt acts hurt and offended. How could you think that about me after everything we've been through? Walt's so convincing that Jesse actually apologizes. That's advanced level gaslighting. Getting your victim to apologize for correctly identifying your manipulation. The father figure trap. One of Walt's most effective techniques, especially with Jesse, is dangling father figure approval just out of reach. Jesse's got daddy issues. His real father gave up on him, wrote him off as a disappointment. Jesse's desperate for someone to believe in him, to see his potential, to be proud of him. Walt identifies this need immediately and exploits it ruthlessly. Walt gives Jesse just enough approval to keep him hooked. You're really good at this, Jesse. I'm proud of you. You're smarter than you think. These little moments of validation mean everything to Jesse, but Walt always pairs the approval with criticism or disappointment. He'll praise Jesse one day, then the next day act disappointed in him for some mistake. This creates this cycle where Jesse's constantly trying to earn Walt's approval again. It's like training a dog with inconsistent rewards. If you sometimes get the treat and sometimes don't, you keep trying harder to figure out what earns the treat. Jesse's always trying to figure out what makes Walt proud of him. And Walt uses this to get Jesse to do things he wouldn't normally do. Jesse doesn't want to kill Gale, but Walt frames it as Jesse stepping up and being the partner Walt knows he can be. Jesse wants to prove himself, wants that approval, so he does it. This is particularly cruel manipulation because it's targeting Jesse's deepest emotional need. Jesse's not being manipulated for money or fear, he's being manipulated through love and the desire to be seen as worthy. Weaponizing intelligence. As Walt gets more confident, he starts using his intelligence itself as a manipulation tool. Walt's genuinely smart, especially about chemistry, and he learns to use that intelligence gap to intimidate and control people who don't understand what he's talking about. With Jesse, Walt will launch into these complex chemical explanations that Jesse can't follow, and Jesse, who's already insecure about his intelligence, just nods along and trusts that Walt knows what he's doing. Walt uses technical jargon and complicated reasoning to make people feel stupid if they question him. Well, if you understood the chemistry, you'd see why we have to do it this way. The implication is that the problem isn't Walt's plan, it's your inability to comprehend it. This works even on smart people sometimes. Skyler's intelligent, but she doesn't know chemistry, so when Walt explains something using scientific terms, she can't easily argue with it. She has to just trust that he knows what he's talking about. Walt also uses intellectual superiority to dismiss people's concerns. If someone brings up a problem with his plan, Walt acts like they're not seeing the bigger picture, like they're thinking small while he's thinking strategically. I'm not in danger, Skyler, I am the danger. That whole speech is Walt using dramatic language and confidence to overwhelm Skyler's legitimate concerns with his performance of power and certainty. People who are genuinely confident in their intelligence don't usually need to constantly remind everyone how smart they are. But Walt does it constantly because he's insecure and he's learned that intellectual intimidation works to shut down opposition. Reframing morality. One of Walt's most insidious techniques is how he reframes moral issues to make his actions seem justified or even noble. Walt doesn't just do bad things and admit they're bad, he reconstructs the moral framework so that his actions become defensible or necessary. Murder isn't murder when Walt does it, it's protecting the family or eliminating a threat or doing what had to be done. Those phrases remove the moral weight from the action. When Walt lets Jane die, he later rationalizes it as saving Jesse from a bad influence. He tells himself he was actually helping Jesse by letting Jane die. That's a complete moral inversion, but it lets Walt sleep at night. Walt constantly frames himself as someone who provides for his family. That word choice is important. Providing sounds noble and masculine and responsible. It sounds way better than cooking meth or killing people. This moral reframing is partly for Walt's own benefit. He needs to believe he's the good guy, but it's also manipulation of others because Walt exports this reframed morality to everyone around him. When Walt explains his actions to Skyler or Jesse or anyone else, he presents them in this morally restructured way. And if you accept Walt's framing, his actions seem more justifiable. If you believe that a man provides for his family no matter what, then Walt's choices make sense within that framework. The manipulation is getting people to accept Walt's moral framing in the first place. Once they do that, they're trapped in Walt's logic and it becomes harder to argue that what he's doing is wrong. the calm threat. As Walt becomes more confident and powerful, he develops this technique of threatening people without appearing to threaten them. Walt stops yelling or getting obviously angry. Instead, he gets calm, eerily calm, and he makes statements that sound philosophical or neutral, but are actually threats. I am the one who knocks. That sounds like a statement of fact, but it's actually Walt telling Skyler that he's dangerous and she should be afraid of him. Stay out of my territory. Walt says this to Hank in the garage, and his voice is completely level and calm, but the message is clear: back off or there will be consequences. Tread lightly. Same thing. Walt's not yelling or getting aggressive, he's calmly warning Hank that continuing the investigation is dangerous. This technique is effective because it's harder to call out or push back against than an obvious threat. If Walt was screaming, "I'll kill you if you don't back off," that's clearly a threat and people can respond accordingly. But when Walt makes these calm philosophical statements, there's plausible deniability. He can always claim he didn't mean it as a threat, he was just making an observation. But everyone understands the real message. The calmness also makes Walt seem more dangerous. Someone who's screaming and angry is out of control. Someone who's calm while threatening you is in control, which is more frightening. Creating problems to solve. This is one of the more sophisticated manipulation techniques Walt develops later in the show. Walt creates chaos or problems and then positions himself as the person who can fix them. This makes people dependent on him and makes him look like the hero. With Jesse, Walt does this constantly. Walt's actions create situations where Jesse's in danger or struggling, then Walt swoops in to save him. Jesse ends up feeling grateful to Walt for solving problems Walt created in the first place. Like, Walt lets Jane die, which destroys Jesse emotionally. Then Walt was there to help Jesse through his grief and get him back to cooking. Jesse sees Walt as his support system, not realizing Walt caused the trauma he's recovering from. Or Walt creates tension between Jesse and Gus, then positions himself as Jesse's protector against Gus. Walt manufactured that conflict, but Jesse sees Walter as the one defending him. This is classic abuser behavior. Destabilize someone, then be the stable force in their life. Break them down, then build them back up. Create the problem, provide the solution. It's effective because the victim doesn't see the pattern. They just see that whenever things are bad, this person helps them. They don't realize that things are only bad because that person made them bad. Walt does this on a broader scale too. He creates chaos in the organization or the family, then presents himself as the one who can restore order if everyone just trusts him and does what he says. Emotional leverage. Walt's really good at identifying people's specific emotional vulnerabilities and pressing on them when he needs something. With Jesse, it's guilt. Jesse feels guilty about everything, about getting people hurt, about failing people he cares about not being good enough. Walt uses that guilt constantly. Look what happened because you screwed up, or I need you to fix this because you caused it. With Skyler, it's fear. Fear for her children, fear of legal consequences, fear of what Walt might do. Walt doesn't have to explicitly threaten Skyler most of the time. She's already afraid, and Walt just has to remind her of that fear to control her. With Walt Jr., it's admiration and the desire to help his dad. Walt Jr. sees his father as this hero fighting cancer and trying to provide. Walt leverages that admiration to manipulate how the family sees him. With Hank, it's pride. Hank's proud of being a good agent and proud of his reputation. Walt uses that pride against Hank by making catching Heisenberg personal, knowing it will drive Hank to take risks. The key to this technique is Walt doesn't use the same approach with everyone. He customizes his manipulation to each person's specific emotional weak points. That's what makes him so effective. Deflecting blame. Throughout almost the entire show, Walt refuses to take real responsibility for his actions, and he's developed sophisticated techniques for deflecting blame. Walt's go-to move is, "You made me do this," or "I had no choice because of what you did." He frames his decisions as responses to other people's actions, which makes those people feel responsible. "I did this for the family" means if the family suffers, it's their fault for not appreciating his sacrifice. "You forced my hand" means whatever Walt just did is actually your fault for creating the situation. This is manipulation because it shifts the moral burden from Walt to his victims. Instead of Walt feeling guilty about his choices, other people end up feeling guilty for supposedly forcing Walt to make those choices. Skyler feels guilty for not being supportive enough. Jesse feels guilty for his mistakes that Walt had to fix. Everyone ends up carrying guilt that should be Walt's. The only time Walt truly takes responsibility is in the final episode when he admits to Skyler, "I did it for me, I liked it, I was good at it." And that moment is powerful specifically because it's the first time Walt stops deflecting and admits the truth. The evolution. What's scary about Walt's manipulation is how much he improves at it throughout the show. In season 1, Walt's manipulation is clumsy and obvious. He's clearly lying to Skyler and she knows it. His excuses are thin. His emotional manipulation of Jesse is heavy-handed. But by season 5, Walt's a master. He can manipulate multiple people simultaneously with customized approaches for each. He can lie while seeming completely honest. He can make people question their own reality. He can threaten people while appearing calm and reasonable. And here's the truly frightening thing about Walt's manipulation. He convinces himself first before convincing anyone else. Walt genuinely believes he's doing everything for his family. He genuinely believes he has no choice. He genuinely believes he's the victim of circumstances. That self-deception is what makes his manipulation of others so effective, because he's not performing beliefs he doesn't hold. He actually believes his own lies. That's what makes Walt so dangerous as a manipulator. He's not a cynical con artist who knows he's lying. He's a true believer in his own mythology. And that conviction is what sells the manipulation to everyone else. By the end, Walt's not just manipulating individuals, he's manipulated the entire narrative of his life into something he can live with. And he's so good at it that even the audience sometimes forgets that Walt's not actually the hero of this story. He's the villain. He's been the villain since he chose pride and ego over his family's actual well-being on. Understanding Walt's manipulation techniques isn't just about understanding one character. It's about recognizing these patterns in real life, because manipulators use these same tactics. Playing victim, appearing weak, gaslighting, targeting emotional vulnerabilities, deflecting blame, these aren't unique to Walter White. These are real manipulation strategies that real people use. The difference is, most real manipulators aren't as smart or as systematic as Walt, but the techniques are the same. And once you can spot them, they become a lot less effective. Let me know in the comments if you've noticed other manipulation techniques Walt uses, or if you think I missed anything important. Breaking Bad is so dense with this stuff that you could probably write a whole book on Walt's psychological tactics.